So the title of today's discussion is, with rising fuel costs, EV demand has soared. How can the market develop a supply quick enough to meet the rising demand? I might come to Emma first, if that's okay. Obviously representing the industry, what do you think needs to happen within the industry, but also the assistance needed?
So I suppose, we heard earlier from Aoife that electric vehicles are now firmly established. They're a firmly established part of the market. We've had 15,000 pure electric vehicles sold so far this year. That's 80% up on the previous year, so already huge growth. We expect it'll reach about 20% of the market next year. And then when you consider plug-ins as well, easily 25% of the market could be electric. Obviously, there's a supply issue at the moment. We have also an issue with the cost of raw materials, the cost of production. So really what we need is the current thresholds and the current supports that we have in place. They really need to remain, at least until there's a vibrant used car market. Can you hear me okay? At least until there's a vibrant second-hand market. And I suppose really to increase the accessibility, it's a second-hand market that you need established. Most people buy second-hand. There's a very few percent, when you look at the percentage of buyers, it's a small proportion buy new cars. So the more we can sell right now, the more vibrant used car market we'll have in the future.
Perfect, thank you, Emma. Eamon, I'll come to you next. Conversions, and this is your bread and butter with regards to expanding battery life and conversions. Is there an actual market for that out there, or should we be looking at something else?
Derek, thanks indeed. So I think it's good, to check this out here. How can we expand the availability of EVs, and is conversions possible? And our objective is we want to decarbonize the economy. So we need to do this at scale. We need to, to increase the number of EVs by scale. Unfortunately, battery extenders for cars, for making the older cars go further, and particularly converting ICE cars to EV cars is not going to give us scale. And I think we just have to accept that. For once, if you do happen to have an Aston Martin, for instance, there is a good conversion program from Aston Martin. It costs a mere 100,000 K to get your car converted, and they will give you the ICE engine in a glass box to put in your corporate headquarters when you're finished. So it's at that scale, it's impossible.
Right.
There is a very interesting project in France, in the north of France. They're called Transition One. So they're building kits to convert small ICE cars to EVs. So they're looking at the Renault Clio and the Twingo, and they're looking at the Fiat 500. But this is a project in development, so we're not sure it'll come to reality. They're putting the battery where the petrol tank is, so it's going to be a very small battery, might give you 80 kilometers of range at a cost of €8,000. So unless the Irish government seriously invested in that, I don't think that's our future. I think our future, I'm afraid we've heard it from Dan, it is the Asian invasion from China and the three big companies. Well, I said to you before, Derek, I'm old enough to remember Toyota and Datsun coming to Ireland.
So just explain to people what Datsun is, just so they understand what Datsun is.
Well, Mr. Nissan wasn't happy that nobody knew who he was when he launched the Datsun company, so he changed the name to Nissan-San. But and then we had Hyundai, with the Korean invasion with Hyundai and Kia. I think we have to realize that the market does change, and companies like BYD that we saw, Geely, and Shanghai Automotive, SAIC, they're already in Europe, and they will produce a lot of the affordable cars, which will become the affordable second-hand cars within 10 years.
Thank you. Paddy, with the AA, you're seeing all the positives of the electric vehicles coming in, and you're reviewing them, you're driving them. I'd like to hear your feedback on that, but also you have a lot of members out there, and if you're calling the AA, it's not usually to say hello to Paddy, it's there's something wrong. And what is the feedback from EV drivers that are members, and what's happening, the scenarios there?
It's funny, if I'd love to produce a list of things that go wrong with EVs, but the fact is they don't. They don't break down as such. What we have is often user error, and that's a part of the education process still. What we're seeing is possibly some of the OEMs, possibly at dealer level, not explaining the car properly enough, because often we see someone hasn't properly put in the charging port into their, they haven't clicked it in, or in terms of user error, they just didn't necessarily understand that if you drive the car at 120 on a motorway flat out with the air conditioning on, that it's not going to do the 400 kilometers that it's supposed to do, that you might have to adjust something. So we're seeing that. We're seeing an issue with tires as well, which is one which we didn't necessarily expect. We see a huge issue currently with more than one tire going. So instead of it's 2 or 3 in some cases. So some of the OEMs need to look at maybe the tires that they're fitting to the cars, because obviously there's that desire for range. So they're fitting sometimes thin, spindly eco tires to these cars, which have huge amount of torque. And then of course the new EV owner, who's very excited to show their friend just how much this car can accelerate, does this plenty of times. As you know, Derek, all the torque is available in one go, and the tires don't necessarily catch up. But look, in terms of as the AA, the customer is changing. We see from the insurance side of the business that the insurance premiums for EVs are often the lowest. So there's extra benefits that we're seeing in terms of owning an EV, but the combustibles, the things that traditionally would have broken down in ICE cars, don't exist.
Right.
So they're not there to break down anymore. So now we obviously have changes to how we recover vehicles, and we've introduced things like freewheeling hubs, which allow the ability to tow an electric vehicle, which we couldn't before. Previously, if there was a catastrophic fault with a vehicle, we would have to actually lift it and garage it. But we are bringing in solutions which allow you to now physically tow a vehicle as well. But from a wider perspective as well, it's something that we hope to do in the future. We're hoping to change our fleet to EVs, but there are challenges with that given the amount of equipment that we carry. So that's something that we're actively working with manufacturers to try and change. Even locally, our fleet is quite big, to try and make that transition over to vehicles that can actually carry the equipment to, in most cases, fix the ICE vehicles.
Right. Thank you very much, Paddy. Dan, in the United Kingdom, in my opinion, we're looking across the water and visiting it, going to shows and looking at launches. You're about 6-12 months ahead of us with regards to adoption. Have the UK government done anything with that, whether you're a fan of that political stream or not? Or is it just that early adopters, etc., etc.? What have the UK done that we could imitate/copy?
Well, I think we're in quite a good place in the UK market. We're subject to similar kind of demand and supply issues that you are here, just on a bigger scale, but obviously there's more availability of a wider range of cars. So the UK government have, says it extremely begrudgingly, done some okay things. There are some incentives and subsidies in there which are sort of being tapered off, as is the way once the market kind of gets going on its own steam. But we're very much a global channel, so we kind of benchmark all the countries against each other, and everyone here will be very familiar with people talking about Norway, for example, and the fact that sort of 85-90% of new car sales now there are pure electric, which is fantastic. And we just see that curve and their curve, and we just work out where all the other countries are against it. The UK is probably about 3 years behind that. You're probably another year behind that. America's a presidential term behind that, but behind the UK. But then actually we do a lot of work in Europe as well. We know the Netherlands is a very hot market. Germany, extraordinarily, one of the homes obviously of the engine, is pretty advanced as well. So we look at the whole thing. But in my opinion, and thank God this is the case with the UK government, this is a mega trend that's much bigger than politicians.
Right, so they can't take advantage of it, or they can't stop it.
They can stimulate it to a degree. They can kind of push it, but they can't really do much. Maybe slow it down a touch. But for whatever reason, UK government's been okay on that subject. But I don't know. It could be a different prime minister by tomorrow. So who knows what will happen?
We won't mention. Emma, coming back to you, and Aoife from Zevi, and we're going to have her back up on stage and later on another panel, is already flagging that those incentives are going to start reducing as mass market adopts. So we know that grant isn't going to be there, and they're going to divert it towards infrastructure. What are your dealerships and members saying to say, what else, rather than the financial benefit, what else can we do? Is it education, or what is Simi doing within the industry?
Yeah, I suppose, look, the education piece is hugely important. You're asking people to invest a lot of money in something that they may have some doubts about. And I suppose really people worry about the 2 or 3 times they take it, for a significant range. Most of all, your home charging covers 80% of your driving, but those few times you take it, will it work? How do I charge? Do I know how to use the charger? How many apps do I need? Can I use my credit card? There's so much around that needs to be put in place. And I suppose the industry is well placed, and also Zevi for an education piece around that. And I suppose there's an interesting stat that once you hit about 20% of the market share, that they tend to take off. And that's, you're seeing them. Your neighbour has one, your family member has one, you're driving in one. The taxis, they're more prevalent. So suddenly they're not this unknown thing that you'd like to know about in the future. You're now actually experiencing it. And once you've taken it and used the public charging network, you get more confidence in it. So I think certainly the education piece is important. But really, I suppose going back to the point that I said, to make them affordable and to make them more prevalent, you need to have a vibrant used car market. And really, I suppose the only way to do that is to sell more new cars, more new EVs. It's hard to see where they're going to come from. They're certainly not going to come from used imports at the moment. And we would see there's a real space for the business market, to incentivise the business market to actually, there's no real incentive at the moment for businesses purchasing EVs. They're cars that are released in 2-4 years, generally well maintained as well. So, there's a real market there, I think, to encourage, business owners. And unfortunately, some of the thresholds are now starting to pare back, say on BIK. Again, that was a hugely important part to encourage employees to go electric. So I think, look, once the supports remain in place for as long as they can, and obviously we would say that, and the education piece is important, affordability is important, supply. There's so many things that need to happen. But, like days like this today, when you see all the technology that's out there, there's plenty of, charging information, the models are available. Again, it just raises awareness. It's hugely important.
Paddy, coming to education, I know your colleague Blake recently did a review on the MG4. The affordability, I know Dan says cheap, I'd like to say affordable, just the language
Budget.
usage. Budget. No, affordable. Phenomenal interest. I know that you may not have been in it yet, but this, I don't know, Eamon's nodding at the end there. We're all getting excited about this nearly price parity. When you're looking at the likes of that, and we keep saying the MG4, but there are others in the market as well, or the Aura Funky Cat. Like when you look at that versus a Golf, you're not far off.
Yeah, and we were having a discussion with Martin Lee on the AA podcast yesterday, and we were discussing the fact that the advent of EVs levels the playing field, because previously 10, 15 years ago, when you were talking about a Chinese brand coming in, you were possibly looking at an engine that had been bought from a manufacturer who'd thrown them their second or third hand technology. The build quality mightn't have been so good, and it didn't sound so nice. There wasn't that much sound deadening in it. Now that's changed, because the EVs that are coming in are, as Dan said, beautifully built, and you're not talking about an engine sound. You're talking about technology which is on par. So, and as we discussed yesterday in the podcast, these have got the battery supply right. So some of the traditional manufacturers, as Dan said, are way behind. So these Chinese manufacturers are going to have supply. And recently there was a motor show in my local town of Drogheda, and MG were showing the MG4 there. And as I walked around, people were speaking about it. Regular people who don't know anything about cars were talking about, oh, the MG is here, the MG is here. So I think that acceleration of growth is going to be, dropping the manufacturer brands. It's going to be, I need an EV, I need it to be affordable, what can I have? And that's where the Chinese brands are now going to be able to make hay while the sun is shining.
Thank you. Dan?
Well, I was with an agency for a manufacturer, multiple manufacturers the other day, and they were saying they ran a dealership tour for one of their new electric cars, and I can't say who it was, but it's one of the newer brands, let's say. And they did some work to find out how many people had actually bought that brand before were new to the brand, and 66% of the people were new to the brand. So, I mean, this is just a period, if you're looking to see a change in mindset, a change in loyalty, I think there's been a lot made of loyalty to brands, and I think a lot of the established automakers have not thought this would happen, that people will stick with us. They love Audi, for example, but I really don't think people are that loyal at all, actually, and I think we're going to see a lot of that brand shifting.
I think you're right, Dan, and I think it comes down to cost in a lot of cases. We here, as possibly all EV evangelists in various degrees, we're getting these vehicles for possibly positive reasons. We want to do our bit for the environment. We like the cars, but we do our surveys of members, and it does come down to cost in a lot of cases. We are just about to hit our record price for diesel ever in Ireland. Our next AA survey will show that the record was €2.05 for diesel, and we are just about to pass that. So people in our survey say, why do you want to get into EV? It's because of fuel costs. It's not, the environmental reasons are there, but they're secondary to the cost. So loyalty does go out the window when it comes to how much can I afford and how can I run my household.
Speaking of running your household, Eamon, I'll come to you. Putting a large investment into a vehicle that just sits outside your door and doesn't do much else, but the ability of vehicle to load, V2L, vehicle to B, vehicle to X, whatever it may be, and they're really batteries on wheels.
Yeah,
and I know that you have extensive, you've got a range trailer and et cetera, and you've converted your own Leaf to have a socket in the rear and you can have cups of coffee and all this kind of stuff. But that vision of let's start being smart, and Dan covered it in his video as well with Robert, that circular stuff.
Yeah, I'm a real fan of Dan and of Robert in Fully Charged, because you did a series, Dan, on looking at the domestic energy ecosystem to see the car, the heating in the house, the power in the house, and then the solar generation as a single ecosystem. So I have an old car, I have a 10-year-old Leaf, but when it's sitting on the driveway, it takes the energy from my solar panels during the day into the car. And then at night time, I power my house with my car. But I'm going to tell you one of the most unusual things you'll hear here today. I come from the north side of Dublin, from an impoverished community called Howth. And in Howth, we have free EV charging. Thank you, Aoife. So we have free EV charging. So in the winter, I bring my car down to the village in Howth and charge it up. And then I bring it home and plug in and power my house with the free electricity.
We're not advocating this. Eamon is also not a taxi driver, for all the taxi drivers in the room that were distraught when Lidl turned off the free charging. But getting cheaper electricity.
That's right, yes. So you could charge your car with nighttime electricity. So Energia is, I think they're currently offering 9.2 cents or something for nighttime electricity. So you just charge up your car with cheap electricity and don't pay the 33 cents for that. So I think we need to rethink. The other huge change that is going to happen is that currently we use about 10 units a day in the typical household of electricity. But when we transition to heating our house with electricity and having EVs, we'll be using over 50 units a day. So the cost of electrical energy will be very significant for every Irish family. So I think we really do need now to this education piece, Emma, so that people understand they need to think not consumption of energy, but managers, smart managers of energy in our homes, so that we keep the cost of living affordable.
It's a big ask, Emma, with regards to, traditionally you go into a dealership and you purchase a vehicle and that salesperson talks about the attributes of that vehicle and then off it goes and they return for service. But now there's that whole ecosystem with how to charge, will it connect with my solar, and so that, again, we're back to that education piece. How can we make that easier? Because we hear horror stories of, oh, this person sold me an electric car, didn't tell me I needed a charger. Now, the person buying the car should have known that they needed a charger as well, but do you find that within the industry as well?
I think the industry is obviously well placed. They know the cars very well. You know, the training programs that the manufacturer provide on the car itself, I think is very well established. You know, and I think it's brand new. You know, everyone knows how to fill your car with diesel or petrol. You know, so I do think, you know, a little bit of time maybe at the handover, just really to put people at ease. Maybe even show them, bring them to their charger in the premises and go, this little flap here, you know, lift that up, and then you can fit the DC charger. So, you know, I think overall training is grand, but I think it's trying to look at it from someone who's brand new to it, you know, because you get used to this technology very, very quickly, and you presume people would know how to plug in a DC charger. But if you've never done it and you're only plugging an AC, and then all of a sudden you see, what's that flap? I didn't even know that was there.
Yes.
Just the really small things. So I think, look, that's obviously beneficial. There is obviously a training piece and an education piece. You know, when you start talking about the home and solar panels and, you know, reusing electricity like that. But I think that's all very new for everyone, you know, and I think we're really at the beginning of that journey. So it'll be very exciting to see where that goes as well.
Paddy, people digging their heels in saying, I'm never going to go electric and everything you're doing is wrong. You recently did a road trip from the south of the country up and to show the range of a Skoda Enyaq. and you stuck to 100 kilometres instead of 120. And the backlash, like,
Unreal,
maybe they were
yeah.
paying for the electricity, I didn't know about it, Paddy, but what was, like, people have a real bee in their bonnet, and this, we're going to have to overcome this as well.
Yeah, you're right. And some of the backlash would have been, we do TikTok on which I'm way too old to do, but I do anyway. And it's that generation seems to have a little bit of an issue with, maybe it's just the audience in particular, but there's some issue with not being flat out at 120 on the motorway, that you're holding everyone up, regardless of the fact that trucks are limited to 90. We were just demonstrating the fact that, look, if you do want to save money, you can do. Now, whether it's petrol or diesel, you'll still have the same effect if you reduce your speed, especially back to 100 kilometers per hour, because you're lifting a very heavy object through the air and propelling it forward. But with an EV, you do get a particularly impressive result, as you guys will all know. But there is that hesitancy to be told what to do, or to be encouraged to maybe slow down a bit. But the results are there, and if you do want to save money, those are things that we will always continue to encourage. But yeah, you're right, there was quite a backlash.
It's all good. Dan, you talked about show number 1 for the Fully Charged show, and what we find, if you're an EV evangelist, as Paddy was saying, and we're passionate about it, getting bums on seats and getting people driving them, whether it's through a dealership, but at your events, and the number of people that come to a show, and even when you ask people here, we're all in the space, and who here drives an EV, and not everybody's hand went up. And so there are people that are saying that don't want to drive EV, but if we've got family and friends, and getting people the understanding about electric vehicles, what learnings did you take from your own shows when you run them, when the test drives that are there?
Well, we've been doing test drives now since 2018. I think our last sort of big event in the UK, we ran about 5,000 over 3 days. We know from manufacturers, when they're honest with us, they don't always like to tell us how well it's gone, that to do 500 test drives in a weekend is quite a big deal for them. So someone, unfortunately, from Tesla posted on LinkedIn that people were running to the test drives at our last big show, which was great to see. But I think on average, once you get people in a test drive, they're going to buy a car. That's pretty much the way the industry sees it. And if they get in it, the electric cars convince them, right? So normally people have an appetite to test drive maybe one, maybe a comparison car, some people maybe 3. The real EV geeks at our show will try and drive every single car there. But we know that the sort of marketing spend for a car company to get someone into a test drive is about £3,500 a go. So the ability to have lots of test drives on site is fantastic. We do that at all our shows now. I'm sure doing that in Ireland will be a big thing, because the electric cars, they speak for themselves. Once you drive them, if you have any fears, they kind of melt away. So it's a big part of what we're doing, and actually the only shame is we can't do it all year round. So we are looking at that. How could we make that happen all year round as well?
Interesting.
But yeah, it's incredibly powerful. And maybe it's the torque. Maybe it's just the fact that it's easier to drive. One of our members of our staff was a bit of a nervous driver, and she got an electric car, and she's actually really happy. She's much happier driving because it is effectively easier to drive. No gears, much better safety equipment, and she's actually said it's made her a more confident driver. So there's lots of positive stories, I think, that we can share. But typically when someone gets in one of these cars, it's not long before they're buying one, and then they're telling their neighbour about it or boring their family about it. So it is going to be a very, very quick uptake once it gets going, I think.
Thank you very much. So we've convinced everybody in the audience here that hasn't gone electric to buy electric. Emma, the question that everybody is asking, and I know Paddy has covered it in his podcast, if the availability was there, we'd see so much more electric vehicles on the road. What are you hearing from manufacturers? What are you hearing from industry with regards to our supply chains opening up? When are we getting more EVs?
I suppose from the supply chain point of view, there's so many unknowns that could happen, and I suppose when you look at what's brought the last 2 years have brought, with COVID, with semiconductor shortages, then obviously the war in Ukraine, it's actually impossible to predict it. I suppose we expect from an industry point of view that probably the supply chain issues should be resolved towards the end of next year. 2024 certainly should be back to a more normal, or what we expect the market to look like, and certainly the demand is there for electric vehicles. I think the supply in general will solve itself, But I think electric vehicles are going to be in a huge demand for the next couple of years. And obviously forevermore, but in particular, when you see 20% growth between last year and this year, that's phenomenal. Like if we looked at the market 3 years ago and we'd said what components the ICE market would be compared to even 3 years ago, it's incredible. It's moving at such a fast pace. So I think once the supply chain is there, the demand is huge for electric vehicles. But I do think we will see a huge increase, and particularly the number that Aoife had up on screen for 175,000. I certainly think that that's achievable. We're at 71,000 electric vehicles on the road at the moment. If we look at next year, 20,000, low 20s for pure electric, you can easily see that we're going to hit those targets, particularly the 2025 targets.
You're not saying that the 25 target is too easy for Aoife over there now, are you?
Not at all. No. We need the thresholds. We need the grants.
Sure.
We need the money.
Thank you, Emma. Eamon, as a representative on the committee for the Irish EV Owners Association as well, feedback from people who are coming to that committee and asking, I'd like to get into an EV. What are we hearing from that audience?
Well, the biggest issue is the charging infrastructure. So the first person that came to the stand this morning had said, things are getting tight. The numbers of cars are increasing and the current state of the infrastructure is not adequate. And for instance, he goes to Clare and he no longer goes on the M7 because there's just too much competition for the chargers. So he goes on the M4 now because that alone has a good number of chargers. So I think one thing for our future, okay, I can have a little fight with Aoife. So Aoife there, she said that the future electric cars will likely all have a range of 400 kilometres and more. So, that's a possibility, but I don't think that's what's going to happen because batteries are really expensive and the resources are in short supply. I think that most cars will have, the typical popular cars, the Corollas of the future, and will have a 250 kilometre range. So it will be vital that we have a charging infrastructure that allows people, for the exceptional time that they're going to a funeral or going on holidays or going to visit their mum in Tralee like I do, have the infrastructure to get us there.
Eamon is talking about a kind of a Hunger Games scenario at each of the charging stations. That's not the case if you're not an EV driver. It sounds like there's lots of free chargers up in Holt, so if you want to go there. I'd like to thank my panel for their contribution today. They are going to be around during the day as well if you want to ask them any questions. We are now going to break for coffee. Make sure you go to the exhibitors. Make sure you don't forget the competition that's happening on the solution stands. Well, thank you very much for this morning so far, and thank you very much for my panel.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you, Derek.